Public access cable channels come into existence by agreements between government and the cable companies. When the cable companies want to string wires across a city, they get permission from government. Government, in turn, requires the cable companies to set aside one or more channels for community access. Congress has regulated these kinds of agreements and has specifically found that public access cable channels are meant to be an electronic soapbox, a digital leaflet, a new system to ensure that voices that typically are not heard on television do have a chance to be heard through the community access channel. So it is fundamental to really our democracy that the widest array of voices and groups and ideas be heard in community access cable television stations. Federal courts have ruled that under the First Amendment, public access cable channels must accept the widest array of messages and organizations and voices and ideas, and with very few exceptions, groups and ideas cannot be excluded from community access cable channels. The content on public access cable channels is not the responsibility of the government. It is not attributable to the cable company. It is not even attributable to the community access cable station. It is solely the message of the group that has the slot on the programming to express that message. So no reasonable person viewing a hate speaker could say, hey, why is the cable company saying this? Because it's not the cable company saying it. It's not the community access channel saying it. It's just the particular speaker who is saying it. The purpose of community access cable is to ensure that voices, which all too often are not heard in mainstream traditional cable and broadcast television, have an opportunity to be heard. That is to say, the purpose of these channels is to let the little guy, the small speakers who aren't heard in the larger cacophony of voices in our society, who don't have the means to purchase a TV channel, who don't have the power to get on mainstream television, do have a voice on these community access cable channels. It broadens, it enriches, it makes more diverse our national public dialogue on the total array of democratic questions facing our society. There is a small sliver of speech about human sexuality which does not have protection from the Constitution. That small sliver often goes by the legal name obscenity. Very little speech is legally obscene and therefore prescribable by the government from an environment like community access cable. In order for the government to exclude speech from cable because it is obscene, the government bears the burden of proving, number one, that it is primarily appealing to a prurient interest in sex. Number two, that the speech has no social value. It has no artistic value, no scientific value, no literary value. It has no value. And number three, that the speech about sex is patently offensive to the community. Again, very few expressions about sexuality will fall within this narrow sliver of speech. The government cannot punish somebody for expressing obscenity unless the government proves to a court, bearing the full burden of proof, all three of the elements of obscenity, again, which are that the message is utterly lacking in social value of any kind, that it primarily appeals to a prurient interest in sex, and that it is utterly lacking, that is patently offensive to the community. This is a very steep burden for the government to meet. The government must meet this burden in a court of law, and that is the only situation in which obscenity can be censored from any environment, including in community access cable channels. Time and again, courts have struck down so-called hate speech laws which restrict the utterance of messages which are hateful of a particular racial, ethnic, or religious subgroup, precisely because, again, the government cannot be trusted to make good, fair, reasonable decisions about which utterances are legitimate and which utterances are not legitimate to our democratic discourse. Instead, all speakers should be allowed to speak in community access cable. If someone hears something they don't like, they've got a lot of remedies. They can change the channel. They can call into the show and state their objections. They can get their own show on community access cable channels and express a counter message. But the government should not be in the business of cleansing so-called hate speech from public forums such as community access cable.